The monitors flatlined at 2:14 a.m. We're losing her, a nurse shouted, panic cutting through the ICU. On the bed lay Caroline Hayes, 38, the powerful CEO of Hayes Dynamics. Everyone had given up, except the janitor by the door, Ethan Cole, a former Army medic about to change everything. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. The monitors flatlined at 2:14 a.m. in St. Jude Memorial's ICU, a sound Ethan Cole would never forget. The room snapped into motion, nurses shouting, carts rattling, the attending barking orders that weren't working. On the bed lay Caroline Hayes, 38, CEO of Hayes Dynamics, the woman whose face lived on half the billboards in the city. Now her lips were blue, her pulse gone. Ethan wasn't supposed to be inside. Night janitors mopped, emptied bins, pretended not to hear families cry. That was the rule. But he'd heard that flatline too many times in another life, under canvas tents and red dust skies. His chest clenched. "Sir, you need to wait outside," a nurse snapped as he stepped forward. "I was an Army medic," Ethan said, voice rough but calm. "You've got nothing left to lose. Let me in." The attending hesitated a single beat. The monitor screamed. 60 seconds, he muttered. Ethan moved to the bed, placing his hands higher than standard, angling Caroline's jaw, switching rhythm like they'd taught him for blast casualties. "Stay with me," he whispered. "You don't get to quit, not tonight." Nothing. Then, one blip. Another. The flatline fractured into a stuttering heartbeat. Gasps rippled through the room. Sinus rhythm returning, someone breathed. Ethan exhaled slowly, backing away, heart pounding. Security was already moving toward him for breaking protocol. Hours later, when Caroline's eyes finally opened, the only face she saw in the doorway was his, the janitor who refused to let her die. By morning, the story had escaped the hospital walls. A nurse had recorded part of it, "Janitor saves CEO," and within hours, Ethan's name was everywhere. His phone buzzed with messages from strangers, from old Army friends, even from his landlord suddenly remembering his first name. Reporters waited outside St. Jude, their cameras aimed at a man who still wore the same faded uniform and carried a mop instead of medals. Ethan hated it. He wasn't a hero, he kept telling people. He'd just done what needed doing. But the media didn't care for humility. They wanted a headline, not a man who caught the bus home to a half-empty fridge and a 10-year-old daughter waiting with reheated mac and cheese. 2 days later, Caroline Hayes requested to see him. The hospital's executive floor smelled like antiseptic and roses. She sat upright in her bed, pale but alert, her voice steady. "You're Ethan Cole," she said. "The janitor who saved me." He shifted awkwardly. "Just did what anyone trained would do, ma'am." "Then anyone should be on my payroll," she said quietly. "I read your file. You were a medic. Why a janitor now?" Ethan hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. "Because sometimes saving lives doesn't pay the rent." Caroline studied him for a long moment, something changing in her expression. "I built a company that designs safety systems for machines," she said. "Maybe it's time I designed one for people." She slid a card toward him. "Hayes Dynamics. I want you there. I'm starting a new initiative, training employees to respond in crises. You'll lead it." Ethan frowned. "Me? I clean floors. You saved a life no one else could." "That's leadership," she said. For the first time in years, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't power. It was faith. He pocketed the card. "I'll think about it," he said. 2 weeks later, Ethan Cole stood in front of a mirror, wearing a borrowed gray suit that didn't quite fit across the shoulders. His reflection looked like a man impersonating someone important. His daughter, Lily, stood on the bed behind him, brushing crumbs off her pajamas. "You look like one of the superheroes from my cereal box," she said proudly. Ethan laughed softly. "Yeah, the tired one who still does his own laundry." At Hayes Dynamics, glass towers sliced through the sky. He could smell the polished money in the air. Caroline met him in the lobby herself. No cameras, no entourage, just a woman who now walked slower and smiled more than any photo online had ever shown. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cole," she said. "You'll be our human emergency liaison." He blinked. "That's a fancy title for a guy who doesn't even own a tie." "Good," she said. "We've got plenty of ties. What we don't have is humanity." She led him through the offices, rows of silent screens, people typing like machines. "They design safety software for airplanes," she said, "but half of them wouldn't know how to save a choking coworker." By noon, she gathered everyone in the atrium. "This," she announced, "is Ethan Cole. The man who saved my life. He'll be building something new here, a program to teach what computers can't: instinct, compassion, and courage." A ripple of polite applause followed. Some clapped sincerely. Others didn't. Near the back, one man didn't even try to hide his smirk: Richard Vaughn, board member, suit immaculate, eyes sharp as a scalpel. After the crowd dispersed, Richard approached. "Impressive speech," he said. "But a janitor teaching executives? That's a stretch, even for Caroline Hayes." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Saving lives isn't about rank, sir." Richard smiled coldly. "We'll see about that." Ethan's first weeks at Hayes Dynamics were a blur of training schedules, first aid drills, and skeptical stares. He didn't belong there, and everyone knew it. The engineers kept their distance, the HR team whispered about the janitor with a hero complex, and the board only tolerated him because Caroline demanded it. But when the first real emergency hit, a heart attack in the break room, Ethan's calm instructions saved a man's life before the paramedics even arrived. After that, people began to listen. Employees who once avoided him now asked questions. He stayed late, teaching chest compressions to interns who'd never touched a medical dummy before. Caroline stopped by one evening, watching from the doorway as he guided a young woman through the motions. "You were right," she said softly. "They're responding to you." Ethan smiled faintly. They just needed permission to care. But not everyone was pleased. Richard Vaughn watched from the upper floor, arms crossed. To him, Ethan's success was a reminder of everything he despised: men who rose without pedigree, who won trust through decency instead of strategy. So Richard dug. He called in favors, military contacts, and reporters who owed him quiet debts. And one night, he found it, the old files stamped confidential. Disciplinary discharge, failure to follow direct order. Result: civilian casualties avoided, mission compromised. The headline he was crafting already formed in his mind. Hero janitor lied about his past. The next morning, Richard waited outside Caroline's office with the file in hand, a smile thin as paper. "Did you know your savior was dishonorably discharged?" he said. Caroline froze, her expression unreadable. "You'd better be sure before you accuse him of anything." Richard's grin widened. "Oh, I'm sure. And when this hits the press, you'll regret betting your company's image on a fraud." Ethan didn't know why the hallways felt colder that morning, but whispers always traveled faster than truth. By lunchtime, he could feel eyes on him, the subtle glances, the hushed tones dying mid-sentence when he entered a room. Something was wrong. In Caroline's office, the air was heavy. She held a thin folder between her manicured fingers, her jaw tight. "Ethan, we need to talk." He knew before she said it. "You found my file." "I didn't," she said quietly. "Richard did." Ethan sat down slowly. "Then you already know." Her voice softened. It says you were dishonorably discharged. Failure to follow a direct order. He nodded once. That's accurate. She waited, searching his face for the rest. He took a breath that felt like opening an old wound. Afghanistan. 2012. My unit was ordered to clear a village suspected of harboring insurgents. I saw children, unarmed, terrified. The airstrike was still coming. I disobeyed the call and pulled civilians out of the blast zone. Saved 12 lives. Lost 2 soldiers. The mission was compromised. They called it insubordination. I called it conscience. Silence filled the room. Caroline set the folder down slowly. You did the right thing. Tell that to the military tribunal, he murmured. Before either could say more, the door swung open. Richard Vaughn stood there, smug and satisfied. Touching story, he said. But headlines won't print the nuance, Caroline. They'll just say, CEO promotes disgraced soldier. You'll sink with him. Caroline rose, her tone steel. Get out. Richard smirked. You can't protect him forever. When he was gone, Ethan rubbed his temples. He's right about one thing. The story will ruin your company. I don't care, she said. You saved my life, Ethan. Maybe it's time I save yours. By evening, the story had broken. The headlines hit every major network within an hour, the janitor hero who lied. News anchors debated his past, guests argued about integrity, and the company's stock began to tremble like glass in a storm. Ethan watched it unfold on a tiny TV in the security lounge, his name plastered beneath his face, every word twisted for drama. He could have defended himself. He could have explained. But he didn't. Words never stopped explosions, he'd learned that overseas. When he stepped into the office the next morning, the silence was sharper than any insult. Coworkers avoided his eyes. A security guard who once called him, Sir, now called him, Mr. Cole, again. Even the interns who'd admired him backed away, afraid of being seen talking to a disgrace. Only Caroline stood her ground. She summoned the board into the conference hall. The air buzzed with tension, reporters waiting outside like vultures. Let's settle this, Richard said, sliding the printed articles across the table. Our new humanitarian face was thrown out of the army for defying orders. The press is asking if Hayes Dynamics values discipline or defiance. Caroline met his gaze coldly. We value decency, Mr. Vaughn. Something you wouldn't recognize if it shook your hand. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard leaned back, smug. If you don't distance yourself, the investors will. Caroline turned to Ethan. You don't owe anyone an explanation. But if you want to speak, now's your chance. He rose slowly, his voice steady. I didn't lie. I disobeyed a command that would have killed children. I'd do it again. If that disqualifies me from this company, then I guess I'm not the man you need. For a moment, silence. Then Richard stood. You're right, you're not. He turned toward Caroline. If he's still here by morning, I walk, and I'll take half the board with me. Ethan nodded quietly. Then I'll save you the trouble. He left his badge on the table and walked out, the headlines echoing behind him. The storm hit just after dusk. Thunder cracked across the skyline, rolling through the city like the sound of distant artillery. Ethan sat in his truck outside a diner, watching rain smear the windshield into silver streaks. He was supposed to pick up his daughter, Lily, from his neighbors in an hour. Instead, he sat there, alone, unemployed, and branded a liar again. His phone buzzed. Caroline. He almost ignored it, but something in his gut told him not to. Cole, he answered. Her voice trembled through the static. Ethan, it's the West facility, our prototype lab. There's a fire. half the staff's still inside. We're trapped on the upper floor. The alarms aren't, the line cut out. Ethan's heart slammed into his ribs. He turned the key, engine roaring to life. Within minutes, he was racing through sheets of rain, tires slicing the flooded streets. When he reached the industrial park, orange flames licked the night sky. Smoke curled like a living thing, devouring the roof of Hayes Dynamics West. Fire trucks screamed, hoses already snaking across the pavement, but the chief was shouting orders, panic in his eyes. Gas leaks on levels 3 and 4, he barked. We can't send anyone in until pressure stabilizes. Ethan grabbed his sleeve. There are people in there. I know, but it's suicide to go now. Ethan didn't wait. He'd run through worse. He ripped a spare mask from an abandoned medic kit, wrapped his jacket around his face, and sprinted through the entrance. Heat hit like a hammer, smoke burning his throat. He could hear shouting upstairs, a woman's voice calling for help. Caroline. He forced his way up the stairwell, each step cracking under the strain. Flames clawed at the walls. At the landing, he found her, pinned under a fallen beam, coughing, soot streaking her face. Ethan, she choked. I've got you, he said, gripping the beam and heaving with everything left in him. It shifted, barely. Then another voice cut through the noise. Help me. He turned. Richard Vaughn, coughing violently, trapped behind a collapsed frame of steel and fire. Ethan's chest tightened. The man who had destroyed him. For a split second, he could have walked away. No one would have blamed him. But he didn't. Hang on, Ethan shouted, running toward the flames. Flames roared like an angry ocean as Ethan pushed through the smoke, dropping to one knee to stay beneath the thick black cloud. The heat was unbearable, metal bending, glass exploding, alarms screaming. He spotted Richard Vaughn pinned beneath a twisted support beam, his suit shredded, one leg trapped. Cole! Richard gasped, eyes wild. Get Hayes, leave me. Ethan ignored him, scanning the debris. A fallen pipe pinned the beam in place. He grabbed a steel rod and wedged it underneath, muscles shaking as he levered the weight upward. His hands blistered instantly. You're not dying here, Vaughn, he shouted through clenched teeth. The beam shifted an inch, then another. Richard dragged himself free, collapsing against the wall, coughing blood. You should've let me burn, he rasped. Ethan hauled him up, half carrying, half dragging him toward the stairwell. That's not how this works. When they reached the next landing, a fiery crack split the ceiling above. A burning panel crashed down between them and the exit. Ethan dropped to shield Richard. Heat seared his back, the smell of scorched fabric filling his lungs. From the other side, he heard Caroline's voice. Ethan. I'm here, he yelled. Get out with whoever you've got. I'll follow. But she didn't. She appeared through the smoke, limping, eyes fierce with disbelief. You came back for him? Ethan managed a hoarse laugh. Couldn't let my favorite critic die on the job. Together, they half-dragged Richard through the collapsing hallway. Outside, the roar of water and sirens grew louder. A final sprint, and they burst into the open air, falling to their knees as firefighters rushed in. Rain hissed against the burning roof. Caroline coughed hard, gripping Ethan's arm. You saved him, she whispered. After everything he did. Ethan's voice was barely audible. Kindness doesn't need a reason. Richard stared at him, ash-streaked, shaken, his arrogance burned away. I tried to destroy you, he said quietly. And you still. Ethan met his eyes. You were worth saving too. Morning light spilled through the hospital blinds, turning the room pale gold. Machines hummed softly beside Ethan's bed. His arm was bandaged, his ribs bound, and his throat felt like sandpaper from the smoke. He tried to sit up, but a voice stopped him. "Easy, soldier." It was Caroline, her face bruised, hair tied back, eyes rimmed red from exhaustion. She was alive. So was Richard Vaughn, sitting silently in the corner, one leg in a cast, staring at the floor as if the night still played behind his eyelids. "You saved us," Caroline said quietly. "Both of us." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Guess I'm not great at quitting jobs." She laughed, a real laugh this time, and shook her head. "You risked your life for the man who tried to destroy yours." He looked at Richard, voice rasping. "He didn't need to burn for me to prove anything." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Richard stood, limping closer. His usual polished arrogance was gone, replaced by something almost unfamiliar, shame. "I was wrong," he said, his voice rough. "About you. About everything. You didn't ruin this company. You saved what's left of its soul." Ethan blinked, unsure how to answer. Richard continued, "The investigation's already started. Faulty wiring, ignored maintenance reports. That's on me. I'll face it." Caroline's gaze softened, her voice steady. "And I'll make sure Ethan Cole never mops another floor again." She turned to him. "You're not fired, Ethan. You're promoted, director of the emergency initiative. Nationwide rollout. You'll train every branch we own. You've turned tragedy into purpose." He swallowed hard. "Caroline, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she replied, smiling faintly. "And then go home to your daughter. She deserves to know her father's name stands for something." Richard stepped forward, extending a trembling hand. "Thank you for saving my life," he said simply. Ethan looked at it for a moment, then clasped it firmly. "Maybe now we both get to start over." The city had calmed by the time Ethan returned home. Rain-washed streets glowed under the evening lights, the air still carrying a faint scent of smoke and renewal. His apartment door creaked open to the sound of laughter, Lily's laughter, bright, unbroken. She was sitting at their small kitchen table, surrounded by crayons, cardboard, and glitter. "Daddy," she squealed, running into his arms before he could set down his jacket. "You're on TV again. Miss Parker at school said you're a hero." He winced playfully. "Oh no, not that word again." She pulled him toward the table. In the center sat a small, uneven paper sign that read in colorful letters, "Ethan Cole, Life-Saver." Below it, two stick figures held hands beside a giant red heart. "I made this for your office," she said proudly. "Miss Hayes called. She said you get a new one now." Ethan knelt beside her, his throat tightening. "Yeah, I guess I do." Lily studied his bandages, her small fingers tracing the edge of the gauze on his wrist. "Does it hurt?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." A knock came at the door. When he opened it, Caroline Hayes stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a coat, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her smile was warm, not corporate. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Never," Ethan said, stepping aside. She set the coffee down and glanced around the tiny apartment, the peeling paint, the drawings on the fridge, the single father who had changed her life. "This is the kind of place where real things happen," she murmured. Lily looked up at her. "Are you the lady Daddy saved?" Caroline knelt to meet her eyes. "Actually," she said softly, "he saved me twice, once in that hospital, and again when he reminded me what people are supposed to be." Lily smiled shyly. "He saves everyone." Ethan ruffled her hair. "Only because she gave me a reason to keep trying." For a long moment, the three of them stood in quiet understanding. Outside, the sirens had faded, replaced by the hum of the city returning to life. Caroline lifted her cup in a toast. "To second chances," she said. Ethan met her gaze. "And to remembering what matters most." In the reflection of the window, firelight from the city glimmered like stars. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt the world finally breathe again, proof that even the smallest act of courage could outshine a lifetime of doubt. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.